What would happen to him if he talked to me now about those documents?
He very well could go to jail for 6 months.
Say this again?
There is presently pending a motion by Brown and Williams to hold Merrell in criminal contempt. And even under that circumstance, I'm still not allowed to talk to my client.
Unbelievable as it may seem, a Louisville, Kentucky judge has forbidden this lawyer from talking to his own client about the documents in a case in which he's defending him. Documents that reveal military secrets? No. He can't talk to him about documents revealing tobacco secrets. And to some people in Kentucky, that's worse than revealing military secrets.
I'm Mike Wallace.
I'm Morley Safer.
I'm Ed Bradley.
I'm Steve Croft.
I'm Leslie Stahl. Those stories and Dandy Rooney tonight on 60 Minutes.
Thousands of documents from inside the tobacco industry have surfaced over the past year. Documents that appear to confirm what a former U.S. Surgeon General and the current head of the Food and Drug Administration have been saying, that the nicotine in tobacco is addictive and that smoking does in fact contribute to the deaths of over 400,000 Americans every year. Nonetheless, the tobacco companies insist these documents are incomplete and that they are being leaked by people who want to tell just one side of the story. The tobacco companies maintain that nicotine is not addictive and that while smoking may be, in their words, a risk factor, there is no scientific proof that their products cause diseases like cancer. We learned of a tobacco insider who might know the whole story, who could tell us whether or not the tobacco industry has been leveling with the public. That insider was formerly a highly placed executive with a tobacco company, but we cannot broadcast what critical information about tobacco, addiction, and public health he might be able to offer. Why? Because he had to sign a confidentiality agreement with the tobacco company he worked for, an agreement that prohibits him from talking about anything he learned while he was employed by them. It even says that, quote, all information acquired by you, including this agreement, cannot be divulged. The management of CBS has told us that knowing he had that agreement, if we were to broadcast an interview with him, CBS could be faced with a multi-billion-dollar lawsuit. The fact is, we're not allowed even to mention his name or the name of the company he worked for, and of course, we cannot show you his face. Is your confidentiality agreement with still in force?
Yes, it is.
So that what are they going to do, sue you for making this appearance?
I would bet on it.
The former executive has reason to bet on being sued, for major cigarette manufacturers have an impressive track record in court. They have defeated virtually everyone who has sued them over the health effects of tobacco. And they have used the courts, some would say, to intimidate the media and others from reporting on the health effects of tobacco use.
Tonight, a day one investigation that could completely transform the tobacco industry.
One ingredient contained in these tobacco leaves is known: nicotine. The 1988 Surgeon General's report identified nicotine as a highly addictive drug and said this is why smoking can be as difficult to quit as heroin or cocaine.
News organizations got the message when Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds brought a lawsuit in a Richmond, Virginia court against ABC News. That lawsuit demanded over $10 billion in damages. Murray Bring is the general counsel of Philip Morris.
Philip Morris filed a $10 billion lawsuit against the American broadcasting companies and several ABC employees for false and defamatory statements made on ABC's Day One news show and other news programs.
ABC had alleged that the tobacco companies spiked the nicotine levels in their cigarettes, implying they added nicotine to their products from outside sources. And ABC settled the case, apologizing for using that word.
ABC News agrees that we should not have reported that Philip Morris and Reynolds add significant amounts of nicotine from outside sources. That was a mistake that was not deliberate on the part of ABC, but for which we accept responsibility and which requires correction. We apologize to our audience, Philip Morris and Reynolds.
ABC also agreed to pay for the legal fees incurred by Philip Morris and R.J. Reynolds, reportedly over $15 million.
And Philip Morris advertised the ABC apology in newspapers around the country. Nonetheless, ABC News, in its apology, continued to maintain that the tobacco companies, quote, control the levels of nicotine in cigarettes in order to keep people smoking, close quote.
Many in the media and the legal community thought that ABC had a very strong defense. but that the fear of losing a multi-billion-dollar judgment in a state where tobacco was a major employer apparently was enough for ABC's top management to settle out of court. The hardball tactics of the cigarette industry are understandable given the increasing pressure against smoking and smokers. The companies are fighting for their economic lives, and their tactics sometimes result in some bizarre situations. Take the case of this man, Merrell Williams. Williams worked as a paralegal in Louisville, Kentucky, in a firm that represented the Brown & Williamson Tobacco Company. Williams walked off with 4,000 pages of Brown & Williamson files, including some of their most revealing top-secret documents. Brown & Williamson went into a Kentucky court to put a gag order on Williams that prevented him from talking to anyone, including this man, his own attorney, Fox DeMoisey, about those documents.
Do you want to tell me anything, Mr. Williams, about these documents?
He cannot. He's prohibited from making any public statement about the documents or his employment, anything he learned during his employment, or anything he learned as a result of what he learned from the employment.
What would happen to him if he talked to me now about those documents?
He very well could go to jail for 6 months.
Say this again?
There is presently pending a motion by Brown & Williamson to hold Merrell in criminal contempt. And even under that circumstance, I'm still not allowed to talk to my client, even though there's now asserted criminal charges.
I don't understand. You're not allowed to talk to your client. You're sitting with your client right now. And you're not permitted, despite the fact that you represent him.
Oh, I can ask him about the Reds and what he thought of the World Series and things like that.
But you cannot.
About the guts of the case, the documents, what did you do, why did you do it? It's been our position that Jeffrey Dahmer killed and ate people, and he
killed and ate people.
Right.
The serial killer.
Correct. And he had counsel, complete access. Aldrich James had sold our country's national security secrets. He had counsel. The lesson to be learned here is that, you know, you can kill and eat people, you can sell national security stuff, and you're entitled to counsel. But if you take Brown & Williamson's documents, your rights are suspended.
Copies of the documents that Merrell Williams took, along with others from inside the tobacco industry, were leaked and were then made public in the New York Times, the Wall Street Journal, and the Journal of the American Medical Association, as well as on the Internet. Nonetheless, Merrell Williams still cannot talk about them. But Professor Stanton Glantz, who says he got copies of the documents from an anonymous source, can talk about them. Dr. Glantz is a professor at the University of California Medical School in San Francisco. Professor Glantz, who is not constrained by a confidentiality agreement or a gag order, led a team of scientists in analyzing the Brown & Williamson documents, and that analysis was published in the AMA Journal. Documents which, without saying so outright, seem to confirm that the tobacco companies themselves were well aware of the potentially harmful effects of smoking. What is the story that the documents told you?
Well, they told me several things. First of all, they told me that 30 years ago, Brown & Williamson and British American Tobacco, its parent, knew nicotine was an addictive drug and acted on that knowledge. They knew smoking caused cancer and other diseases, and they acted on that knowledge.
What do you mean they acted on that knowledge?
They undertook very sophisticated research initially, internally, to try to reduce the level of cancer-causing agents in the cigarette smoke and to make the cigarettes safer. And they also developed very sophisticated legal strategies to keep this information away from the public, to keep this information away from public health authorities.
What kind of sophisticated legal strategies?
They routed the sensitive materials through the legal department so they could then claim they were covered by attorney-client privilege and refused to produce them to the courts and to public authorities.
Dr. Glantz, an anti-tobacco activist, put copies of the 4,000 pages from Brown & Williamson, together with thousands of other pages obtained by the Congress, onto the shelves of the university library. But the University of California was then sued by Brown & Williamson, demanding that the university remove those documents from the library. But Brown & Williamson was unsuccessful. Dr. Glantz told us that the documents from Brown & Williamson raise yet another critical issue, the additives, the flavorings, and other compounds the tobacco companies put in their products.
When you put additives in the cigarettes, you then burn them, and in the process of burning them, they change.
And Dr. Glantz gave us a stunning example.
For a while, they were using Freon, the thing they used to use in refrigerators, as a way of puffing up the tobacco, of what they called expanding it, so to make it so it didn't weigh as much. Turns out when you burn Freon, you get phosgene, which is nerve gas.
And it appears from the document, says Professor Glantz, that Brown and Williamson was concerned about the scientific theory that the small amounts of phosgene in cigarette smoke could possibly pose a health risk to smokers.
But at least over the period of time covered by the documents, even despite that, they continued using the Freon process.
To this day?
I don't know.
And as the Wall Street Journal reported last month, tobacco companies use ammonia as an impact booster for the nicotine in cigarettes. Dr. Glantz says that according to documents from inside Brown and Williamson, the company is in the business of selling nicotine, in effect producing a nicotine delivery device.
In the documents, they say that over and over and over again.
Am I taking this too seriously? I mean, it's like sticking something in your arm.
Well, it is, except inhaling it gets it to your brain faster than sticking it in with a needle. And that's why smoking something is the most addicting way to use a drug. That's why crack cocaine is more addictive than snorted or injected cocaine.
Because that gets to your
brain faster. It goes to your lungs, it's absorbed very fast, and within a few seconds it gets to your brain. If you inject it with a needle, you don't get the hard hit that you get when you smoke it.
Dr. Stanton Glantz's articles in the AMA Journal appear to have had interesting results. In Congress, where the tobacco industry has a lot of clout, in this year's budget for the National Cancer Institute, the House of Representatives took unprecedented action, eliminating just one grant, Dr. Glantz's. Scientists from around the country have protested so far to no avail.
One of the reasons...
The power of the tobacco industry to keep its documents secret was demonstrated last July by Congressman Henry Waxman of California, who read from Philip Morris documents on the floor of the House, explaining he could only read them there because he had immunity from being sued for anything he said on the floor of Congress. Meanwhile, there is a federal investigation in New York and Washington about whether these men, who at the time headed the country's major tobacco companies, whether any of these men lied to Congress when they testified about whether or not the nicotine in their tobacco products was addictive.
I believe nicotine is not addictive, yes.
Mr. Johnston.
Congressman, cigarettes and nicotine clearly do not meet the classic definitions of addiction. There is no intoxication.
We'll take that as a no.
I don't believe that nicotine or our products are addictive.
I believe nicotine is not addictive.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
I believe that nicotine is not addictive.
And I, too, believe that nicotine is not addictive.
As we said at the beginning, the tobacco companies maintain the leaked documents we told you about do not tell the whole story. So we invited the tobacco companies, including Lorillard, the company owned by the same company that owns CBS, to tell us the whole story. They declined. As we also said, we wanted to publish an interview with a former high-ranking tobacco executive who might be able to tell us what the companies wouldn't tell us. But CBS management told us we couldn't do that. Why? Because the insider had signed that confidentiality agreement, and because we knew about it, the cigarette company that he worked for could sue us for, they would claim, inducing him to break that agreement. And the potential liability to CBS as a result could reach into the billions of dollars. All of this, of course, speaks to a disturbing reality, that news organizations can be sued not for the truth or falsity of what they report, but instead just for seeking out information from insiders who have material important to the public health and welfare, but who have signed confidentiality agreements. I'll have a personal note about all this later in the broadcast.